Hello and welcome to the tutorial video series for the Custom Story Creator. My name is Cody with Eek Games, and I am one of the developers for House Party that has worked on the original story, as well as all of the DLC that we have released over the past couple of years. This tutorial video series is going to cover all of the aspects of the Custom Story Creator that you need to know, so that you can create your own story from scratch with your own characters, and then finally upload that to House Party so that other people can play through it. This first part of the tutorial series is going to cover downloading and installing Unity. We're going to go through the hierarchy window over here, which allows you to create your own story from scratch, as well as select which characters you want to appear in your story. We're going to cover game start events to determine what you want to happen at the beginning of your custom story. And then we're going to go over interactions for items, doors, chairs, and beds, so you can get those set up and players can use those in your custom story. Let's go ahead and dive in. Now, to get started with the Custom Story Creator, you will need to download two things. The first of which is the Custom Story Creator files, which are available from the Eek Games website for House Party. And the second thing is that you'll need a copy of Unity, which is available for free from their website here. You can go to this website by going to unity.com/download, and then selecting download for Windows, or Mac or Linux, depending on which program you're using. Once you download Unity Hub, you will come to a window that looks something like this, and if you click over here on the left where it says Installs, you'll be able to install the editor and select which version of Unity you want to use. I would say go ahead and use the recommended version, whatever version number this is. It doesn't necessarily matter which version of Unity that you're using. The Custom Story Creator is available to use with pretty much all of them. Now, once you have Unity Hub installed and a version of Unity, you can go ahead and open up the Assets folder of the Custom Story Creator download that you got from the website on Eek Games, and select the file that says Story Creator, click me first. And once you do that, it'll bring us to a window that looks something like this. Your window may not look exactly like this, but don't worry, we're going to go over how to get it looking how we want it to. Now, for the purposes of the Custom Story Creator, we really only need two windows, which is the Hierarchy window, available here, and then the Inspector window here. So, no matter what your windows look like, you can right-click on any of these tabs and close them. You can also drag and drop these tabs to put them wherever you want them to be. And then finally, if you right-click on a tab, click Add Tab, you'll see the Inspector and Hierarchy windows are available here. Now, I would recommend for the Custom Story Creator to have a layout similar to this, where the Hierarchy window is on the left, and then the Inspector window is over here on the right. That's because the majority of the work that we do in the Custom Story Creator is going to take place over here in the Inspector window. And the Hierarchy window is where we have our actual files and our characters that we want to click through when we're working in the Custom Story Creator. So this layout here, with the Hierarchy on the left and the Inspector window on the right, is what I'll be using for this tutorial video series. Once you have a setup that you're comfortable with, you can go ahead and we can start diving in to how to make your custom story. So let's start over here in the Hierarchy window, where you can see this game object called Stories. And now underneath the stories, we have all of the stories available to us in the CSC to start with, which is three of them: the original story, a tutorial story, and then a blank story. The original story is a copy of the original story as of 1.4.1. So if you want to click through here and see how we set anything up in House Party, everything is available to you. Everything including dialogue, event triggers, all of the items. This is a very good reference point, but the original story is a bit of a monster because it has been created by multiple people over many years of development. And so it's good to reference it, but it is also good to start fresh and look at some other examples, which is why we have the tutorial story here. This is primarily where we're going to be spending our time in this tutorial video as we walk through step by step what I have in here And this is a good launching point for your own story because it covers all of the basics that you need just to get up and running with your own story. And you can also load up the tutorial story in House Party and play through it. These characters have some cheeky dialogue, kind of walking you through the different components of the CSC and what different things do. So I really would recommend playing through it while looking at the CSC to see how it all connects together. And beneath the tutorial story, we have a blank story, which is exactly what it sounds like. There's not much going on here. It's just the characters from the original story, and then we have some basic interactions, and that's it. So this is a good story if you just want to pick it up and run with it and start making your own stuff. That's a good way to go. You can also create your own story underneath here if you want to start completely from scratch, which I can show you how to do that. But first, we're going to need to understand the structure of the story within the hierarchy. So what I mean by that is, the stories within the CSC are built from a couple different components. First, we have a top-level story collection, which is right here, the tutorial story. So you can see we have a story content manager here, and then we have the story collection. So below the story collection, we have a story script, which governs the overview of the story, and things like player event triggers, radio wheel interactions, item interactions, things like that. Then, beneath the story collection script and adjacent to the story script, we have an empty game object called characters, and below that, we have a character story script for each of the characters in our story. In this case, we have Amy and Derek, but if you come up to the original story here, expand characters, you can see all of the characters that we have available in the original story, including the DLC with Doja Cat. And Liz Katz and all our other DLC characters. But what we need to focus on here is that if you want to create your own separate story from this, you would just have to create a couple of game objects and then attach these scripts to it. So I can show you how to do that real quick, and then we can go ahead and get rolling on the actual tutorial story itself. So if you wanted to create your own story here from scratch, it's pretty simple to do. You could just right-click on this stories object, and then go create empty. And this could be your story. And then we add component here in the inspector window. So if you type into the search bar here story, you'll see that we have a story collection component. Add that on there. Now the story name needs to match your game object over here. So this would be your story. And you can change that by coming over here to unlock or lock. To show you that again on the tutorial story here, same thing, tutorial story on the game object, story name, tutorial story, unlock, we can name this anything we want. Now beneath this, we would right click, create empty. Make sure that this is named the same thing as your story collection. Add component, story. And now it's very important that these three things all match up, which is the story script, the story collection, and the story name. All three of these need to have the same name in order for you to be able to playtest it in House Party. So make sure that these are all identical. Now, last thing we need to do here is create an empty game object, and we'll call this characters to hold our characters in the story. And then one last time, we're going to right click here and click create empty. Now, the characters that you have available to you in your custom stories are the same characters that we have available in the original story. So you can't technically create a complete character from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and pick, let's say, Madison here. And then we'll go to add component. And I have story typed in already, so you can see we have a character story at the top. And we'll go ahead and add that to it. Now the very last thing we need to do to make this Madison in the game is we need to come over here to where it says original character name. Come over to unlock. And then this needs to match whatever this game object is here. So we'll lock that. So now, if we come up here to our story collection, you can see Discovered Character Stories, Madison. And what this does is this looks beneath the game object for the story collection and finds the character story for Madison here. So if you come up to the original story, you can see Discovered Character Stories is all of these characters. Tutorial story, Amy and Derek, because that's who we have available underneath the tutorial story. So when you're creating your own custom story, if you want to make one completely from scratch, I would recommend coming up to the original story and then looking at the characters we have available. Other than the DLC characters like Liz Katz, Amala, Doja Cat, you can take any of these characters like Patrick, Rachel, Derek, Brittany, and then go ahead and recreate them in your own story. So the blank story is a good example of it here, because all of these characters are the base game characters that you can pick from. And then you come up to the story collection and you can see Discovered Character Stories are all of these characters here. Once you have your custom story set up, we can go ahead and take a look at the game start events, which are how you determine which NPCs you want enabled, which items you want enabled, and which events you want to fire at the very beginning of the game. Now, before we dive into that, we're going to take a look real quick at the story collection script. And there's an option in here for the male player character and the female player character, which is going to be these two checkboxes right here. Now, whichever ones you have checked here is going to determine which gender the player is able to play as in your custom story. If you have both of these selected, like I do here, then the player is going to be able to select either male or female, depending on what they want to do. So if you want to set your custom story up in a certain way with a certain gender for the player, then this is the spot that you're going to want to take a look at to do that. These other two options under here for original story items and default story items behavior, you can go ahead and leave these unchecked, or don't worry about them at all, because this is an outdated component of the CSC. In the 1.4.2 release, the way that it works with items in House Party is all of the items that are lying around the house in the original story are going to visually be there in your story unless you manually disable them. Now, the player won't be able to interact with them in any meaningful way, so they won't be able to click on the item to pick it up, to inspect it, to interact with it, unless you enable that item and add a radio wheel for interaction with that item. So pretty much all you need to worry about with that is just assume that all of the items are around the house, but the player won't be able to interact with them unless you give them the option to interact with them yourself. And you can do that through the game start events. So let's take a look there on the story script. Under this current aspect here, we have our drop-down menu for all of the different options available within the custom story creator. And we're going to come down here to the player event triggers. So the event triggers are the backbone of the entire custom story creator, and this is where a lot of your content is going to be made. Event triggers are essentially a group of events that you set up to fire under a certain condition when a certain criteria is met. And there are event triggers available for all characters, so the player event triggers are here, but if we come over to Amy, for example, you can see that Amy has her own list of event triggers available here, and Derek does as well. One thing to note is these asterisks here, such as the game start, combat reactions, these are all empty event triggers that I put in here just for headers and organizational purposes. So if you come to the player event triggers, you can see I have a couple of them under game start, something under combat, and these are really just suggestions for how you want to organize your own event trigger list. If you take a look at the original story and we come to the player event triggers, you can see we have a whole bunch of event triggers, and we use these asterisk headings just to visually break it up and allow us to organize things within this list. But that's optional, and it's up to you how you want to keep things organized. Now, coming back to the player event triggers, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the top here with this event trigger right here. which is a game start new game event trigger. Now, event triggers have three main components that we need to take a look at. First is a condition to fire the event trigger, which you can see if you click this drop-down list all of the different options that we have. In this case, we're doing game start, which means when the game first starts, it's going to fire this event trigger. When the event trigger fires, it's going to check the criteria, which is available down here. On this one, there's a single line of criteria, which is checking to see if it's a new game. And if it is, then it's going to come here in the middle to perform the following events. So this basic structure here is how things work within event triggers, and it's important to understand this concept because these are used throughout the entire custom story creator. So we have a condition that fires, it checks the criteria, and if the criteria is met, then it's going to perform these events. And it's going to perform these events from the top down. Within these events, if we expand one of them, you can also see that there is another set of criteria here, which means that you can have a different criteria for each event within an event trigger, and it will only fire any of these if this criteria is met for all of them. So we're going to go through this step by step and show how the game start events work and how to get a basic story set up. So on a new game, it's going to fire this event trigger, and it's important that we put is new game true, because if we did not have this criteria here, it would fire this event trigger every time the game starts, including if the player saves and loads your game. So once these conditions are met, it's going to do a display game message. And these here are just events. You can add new events by clicking at top or at end. And then if we expand this, you can see the list of all of the events we have available. To remove them, you just delete them with this button over here. So this display game message is just a type of event. The narration display game message is that black horizontal box that you see at the beginning of House Party where it says something along the lines of "There's a party at Madison's house." The thought bubble and center screen text are the ones that appear over on the side of the screen, like in, I believe, white. And then this right here is just the text that is a little bit of an introduction for the tutorial story when the player first starts the game. Next, we have two event triggers being called from this event trigger. You can see if we expand this that we just have an event type of event trigger, player, because we have different event triggers on different characters, perform event, and then the game starts enable NPCs. And then similarly, we have game starts enable items. So when this event trigger fires, it's going to display the game message, then it's going to do this event trigger, and then it's going to come down here and do this event trigger. So if we go take a look at this game starts enable NPCs event trigger, you can see that the condition to fire is set to never. And there's also no criteria here on the bottom. So what this means is this event trigger is never going to fire unless it's called from somewhere else in the story. Now in this case, the game starts enable NPCs event is being called from the new game event up here. So once it calls this event trigger, it's going to come down here and it's going to enable both of our NPCs. Same thing with enable items. It's going to come down here and it's going to enable a couple of items around the house. Now this display game message here is just for tutorial purposes, and you can see I have a criteria set to never. So even though this event trigger is going to fire and it's going to set these items to enabled, it's actually never going to fire this display game message. So when you're playtesting, the player is never going to see this. Now earlier I mentioned that the items that are laying around the story in the original story are going to be there, but they're not going to be interactable. If for some reason you don't want those items to appear, all you need to do is come here to your game starts enable items and set it to false. And that will make the item essentially disappear from the game world. When it's set to true, that means that item is going to be enabled, and the player will be able to interact with it. Now, one thing to note is each of the characters has their own event triggers, and they can be fired under different circumstances. So here you can see under player event triggers we have a game starts new game, and then if we go to Amy, we also have a game starts new game event trigger. So this one's going to fire when the game starts, and it's going to check to see if it's a new game, and if it is, it's just going to determine a spawn location for Amy somewhere in the house. If you come to Derek, he also has a game starts new game. So now when the game starts and it's a new game, this one's just going to use a warp to event, which is right here, to put Derek in the living room. Now if we go to Amy, this is inspired by the original story, where we have a randomized int value, which basically means we're randomizing a value on the player, which is random, between 0 and 2. And then depending on what this comes out as, we are checking our criteria to determine where we want Amy to warp to. And this is how we determine a random spawn location for Amy. So random is a value that we created for the player, which we'll go over that in a later section of this tutorial video. The randomized int value is an event type, and then we put in the values 0 and 2. So now it's going to warp Amy into these locations depending on what the value of random is. So we're going to collapse all this and go step by step. So when the game starts and it's a new game, we're going to randomize this int value, and then we're going to check the criteria for these 3 events. And whatever the player value random equals, 0, 1, or 2, will determine which of these 3 passes. Now it's important to note that if these are above this randomized int value, so if we move this down here, then the player value of random is going to be set to whatever it was before this event trigger fired. So they default to 0, so in this case it's going to fire this event. But assuming that you're changing the value somewhere else, somewhere in the script in a different event trigger or a dialogue or something like that, this is not going to set the value until the end of this event trigger. That is why it's important to pay attention to the order of events that you have within event triggers. So in order for this to work properly and to randomize our spawn location for Amy, we need this to be at the top. So that way it sets the value first, and then it checks the criteria on the events. Now we're going to go into our story script and take a look at the items, doors, chairs, and beds within our tutorial story. Now, these are set up automatically to have an interaction radial on them. So for example, you can see here, if you go to doors, all of the doors within the game are already set up to have an inspect, an open, and a close interaction. So these item actions here are the radial wheel that you see within the game when you click on an object or a game object like a door or a chair or an item. So when you click on it and then you go to inspect, you can see just a generic inspect message that you can fill out and have it say whatever you want when players inspect the fridge. Same thing with open and close. These are automatically set up when you add the item to say door, fridge is closed, door, fridge is open. And this right here is kind of what we already saw with our event triggers, where you have the criteria up here. So this is just checking door, which door it is, and the state that the door is in. And then it's firing an event, which is the exact same thing that we have in event trigger. So in here, all it's doing is it's taking a door event, selecting the door, and then it's opening it. And these are automatically filled out. If you create a completely new story from scratch, like I walked through in the hierarchy part of this tutorial video, you may need to come down here to doors, chairs, whatever, all the way down here. And then any items that are not added yet will be on this list right here. And then you just add events for selected item, and you'll see it pop up here with these 3 basic interactions. And I can demonstrate that a little better by going to our items. Because on our tutorial story, we don't have the load default original story items checked, which means that the only items that are going to be enabled around the house are the ones that we set up on game start, which is in our player event trigger enable items. So, if we go to our items tab here, these are the items that we have enabled in the game right now. So we'll take the towel for instance. When we added the towel from the list, which these are all the available items that we have within the game, it popped up here with an inspect, take, and a use with interaction. So let me demonstrate how to add a new item in case you want to add an individual item to the game and you don't have the default original story items enabled. So let's say you wanted to add the duct tape item, for example. What you would do is you would come here to the enable items on game start. We'll go ahead and add the item here. So this is events, item. We'll go ahead and find the duct tape. There it is. Set enabled, true. And now after that, we need to come up here to the items and then find the duct tape on this list. And if we don't do this, what's going to happen is the duct tape will become enabled, but it will not have any interactions available on the radial wheel, so the player won't be able to interact with it at all. But we're going to go ahead and select the duct tape, add events for selected item, and it'll appear here on the list automatically with the inspect, take, and use with actions. So the inspect text, same thing as before. This is the inspect message, so you can say anything you want here about what the duct tape looks like. Take is using the criteria to check the player inventory, checking if the player inventory has the item duct tape, and if it doesn't, this option is going to be available. So same thing, this is just criteria from a list. So all these other options, we just have player inventory, has item, duct tape, false. If that comes back true, so in which case the player does not have the duct tape in their inventory, they can go ahead and take it. So event, player, inventory, add, duct tape. And that's it. This is set up automatically within the CSC whenever you add a new item. And finally we have the use with, which is, it checks to see if the player inventory has at least one item, and if it does, we have the use with menu. A good example of this, if you played through the original story, is when you have the SD card and the camera. What we do on that one, if we come through to the original story, we go to items on the story script, items, come down to the camera item, and you can see use with, and then it triggers. So if the player inventory has at least one item, then on the item camera, trigger the use with menu. And the use with menu is available right down here, use with interactions. And so these are all the items in the game. You can go ahead and select one, and then add use with interaction, which in this case is already set up. So use the camera item with the SD card. So what happens? If you do that, then it triggers a player event trigger, which fires a little bit of functionality. So this is what we looked at before. This is just calling an event trigger that we already have set up that combines the camera with the SD card. And we could do those events within this game event right here, but in this case, just for organization, we kept it within an event trigger. So if you wanted to set something like this up on your own tutorial story, that's right here. So use with, so we're under duct tape here. You could use with, trigger the use with menu, use with interactions down here, and you could say I want to use the duct tape with the credit card. Why don't we do that? Add use with interaction, and this will automatically check to make sure that the player has the credit card, because they need to have the credit card in their inventory to select it. So if you've played the original story, you know when you click the item, you click use with, it'll pop up in the inventory, and then you select the item you want to combine together. And in this case, you could combine the duct tape with the credit card, and then you could start adding here, under the game events, any kind of logic or anything that you want. So for example, this is just an event. You can have a display game message. You can make it a thought bubble, which is one that appears on the side of the screen over here. You combine the duct tape and the credit card. And then we can do anything we want here. We can go ahead and modify a value to check that. We can remove the credit card from the inventory. We could remove the credit card and the duct tape and add a new item to the inventory. Anything you really want to do here. Anything even crazy. You could even warp the player somewhere else if they did some kind of a weird magic trick. Whatever you want to do, this is how the use with menu is handled. We'll go ahead and remove all this because we don't need any of that. And that's pretty much it for the items that we're looking at. The doors, chairs, and beds all use the same basic functionality as that. So we'll go, for example, chairs. These are all of the chairs within the game. Beds. This is a good example here. So beds, if you go here, does not have any interactions on it yet within our tutorial story. So if you come to one of these screens and this is what it looks like, where it says play interactions and there's nothing listed here, all that means is you just need to add events for selected items to make them interactable in the game. So when you make your blank story here, or whatever custom story you want, if you want to make something separate out of the tutorial or the blank story, and you come to doors and none of these are available, you're not going to be able to open up any of the doors within the house. So you're going to have to go ahead and add these events for these selected items to make them open and closable. Now, one last thing that we can take a look at here for the doors is some basic functionality for like a locking mechanism, because that's something that you might want to use in your game. So let's go down to master bedroom door and expand it. And then same thing as what we've already looked at. We have inspect, open, and close. And right now, all this is checking to do is it's saying, is the door to the master bedroom closed? Now, if we want to have a key, what we can do is go to Add Criteria, and then we can go ahead and check the player inventory for a key. So player inventory has item. We'll go down to K for key, and we have a couple different keys available that are around the house. We could just go ahead and do key 2 here, and true. Oops. Okay, so what I'm going to do here actually is, what we need to check is, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself first. What we need to do is we need to create a new action name and put this in there. So what do we want to do? We want to have the door lock and the door unlock. So what we're going to do for these two is we're going to copy this event and put it down here to say, does the player inventory have the key? And that gives us the ability to lock or unlock the door as we see fit. So on lock, this option on the radio wheel will be available if the player has the key in their inventory. And we want to check to see the master bedroom door is unlocked. So if the master bedroom door is unlocked and we have a key in our inventory, we can go ahead and lock the door. So add event, we're going to go to door, master bedroom door, and then we can lock it. And now we're going to do the opposite under the unlock section over here. So we can go ahead and take this event right here, copy it, paste it under the criteria here, and we want to check to see if it's locked. And then we're going to copy our event, paste it, and change it from locking the door to unlocking the door. So what this is saying is on the radio wheel, if the player has the key and the door is unlocked, we're going to give them the option to lock the door. And if they select this, then this event is going to fire, which is locking the master bedroom door. On the flip side, if the player is looking at the door and it's locked and they have the key, then it will unlock the master bedroom door. And now the last thing we need to do here is we need to, we probably should grab this one that says unlocked. Come up here, remove this event criteria, and add this in here. So this is saying if the door is closed and unlocked, let's have the open option. And you could also add this here if we want to say it's open and unlocked. That allows them to close it, but I feel like we don't really need that one there. One other thing we can do here is we can go ahead and take this criteria and apply it to this. So what's the difference here? So what this means is the criteria at the top is checking to see if the door to the master bedroom is closed, and if it is, give us the option to open the door. The player can select this option, and then it's going to come down here to open the door, but this has criteria on it saying, is the door unlocked? And if it's not, this event is not going to fire. And what we want to do is we probably want to convey to the player, hey, the door is locked, and give them that information. So we can do that by coming over here and adding another event. Let's go to display game message, make it a thought bubble, and put the criteria on here for saying the door is locked. And just say something along the lines of the door is locked and you can't open it. So this kind of showcases some of the logic of the CSC for how individual events can have criteria and then the overall container can have criteria. So in this case, it's checking to see door closed, give us the option to open it. Player selects open. If the door is unlocked, we're going to go ahead and open the door. If it's not, and the door is locked, we're going to tell the player this. But we're going to have to check for this. We can go one step further and say, does the player have the key to unlock the door? So we can go ahead and take this player inventory has item key, copy it, and put it on here to say false. So now the criteria on this event is if the player inventory has key false and the door is locked. Go ahead and tell them the door is locked and you can't open it. But if the player does have the key, we can go ahead and have them unlock it right from this open menu right here. So we can go ahead and add a new event. We can go ahead and go door, master bedroom door, unlock, and that will be copy all and paste. That will be if this criteria is met, except the player does have the key. So we'll set this one to true. So now, if the player does not have a key and the door is locked, we're going to display this game message. But if the player does have the key and the door is locked, we're going to go ahead and unlock the door. Now let's go ahead and copy this event and paste it with the P and set it to open. And similar to what I said before, where you need to worry about the order of your events, this right now will not work because this event needs to be above this event. And the reason is we're checking to see if the door is locked. So if this event is below it, what's going to happen is the player clicks on open, passes the criteria, comes through here, this one doesn't fire, comes through here, this one won't fire, comes through here, this one will fire because the player has the key and the door is locked, and it will unlock the door. But then when it comes down to this event, the master bedroom door will be considered unlocked at this point in time because this event fires first. So we need to move this up. So now what it's going to do is it's going to check to see does the player have the key and is the door locked. And if this passes, then the door will open and the door will unlock. And that's a basic overview of how a locking mechanism might work with one of the doors. And you can take this logic and apply it to any of the doors that you want to control within the game. You can also remove any of these doors. For example, let's say you have the garage door here and you don't want the player to go into the garage at all. You don't even want it to be interactable. This little minus part right here, you can just click this button And now the garage door is, for all intents and purposes, gone. It's still there within the game world, but the player won't be able to click on it and interact with the radio wheel or anything along those lines. Alright, so what that looks like in game now is we'll come over here to our freezer and open it up. And you can see that we have the chicken nuggets item enabled because we added it to our item interactions list. And you can see that we have our inspect text. You can take them, and then they will appear inside of our inventory. Now, like we discussed when we were going over our game start events, if you don't disable an item, then they're going to be laying around the house, but they're not going to be interactable. So if we open up our fridge here, you can see that we have all of these items in the fridge, but we can't actually click on them or do anything with them. You will also notice, if you know how House Party works, there is a cucumber that is supposed to be right here, but that we disabled in the game start events, which is why it's not here anymore. So that's how you can control which items appear in the house and which items are interactable that you want players to be able to pick up and use.